Hey everyone, we have a special guest today, Manon Newell from Engaged Practice Growth Specialists. She's back to talk about the legislation that's passed, what we need to know, and what we should do about it. So start writing down questions that you're going to have for her later, but I'm pretty much going to give her the floor because she knows everything we need to know, and I need to learn it as well. So Manon, welcome to the show. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it feels like another week. That feels like another year went by, right?
Yes.
And I really sympathize with everyone because I think that the mass state of confusion around all of the issues in the CARES Act and just related to the coronavirus pandemic itself is kind of dizzying and mind-numbing. And I know that I hear from my clients several times a day with contradictory information about what they should or shouldn't do, what loan or which loan they should apply for and when,
Absolutely.
what will be forgiven and why and how, all of these questions. And, I am doing the same thing that they're doing in addition to reading the legislation and looking at the Department of Treasury regulations that are coming out and the SBA, supplemental information that they're putting out. I think even among all of those sources, which are the ones that are closest to the actual legislation, there is still some contradictory information.
Is it really? That is scary. Okay.
It is. And I think, it is really just a byproduct of the fact that this legislation necessarily had to be written and pushed through very quickly in order to try to provide relief and bolster the economy to some extent to weather the storm. And so anytime something like that happens, I mean, they already refer to writing legislation as like the same as the process of like making sausage, and it is like the same thing. It's just a really messy process with lots of opinions and ideas trying to work their way into what will become the final piece of legislation. So
I've never heard that, but I think it is very accurate.
Yeah, it's a really accurate description, I think. So anyway, we'll kind of talk about what I think my advice for my clients would be today. This could change tomorrow. And I think all of my clients are aware of that. And we're in touch on a daily basis, kind of talking about any new information that comes up and how we're going to work that piece of information into what we already know. And does it impact the strategic decision that we're making? So from the beginning, my take on this, and I think it's been correct, is that all of the pieces of legislation are really pieces of a puzzle. And it's depending on how we put these pieces together, how we create that strategy that's going to determine how successful we are in utilizing these, pieces of help essentially that are available to us.
Yeah.
And so one of the first, I want to kind of go back before we talk about the EIDL loan and then the PPP loan, which are the major point of our conversation today. But if we think about when all of this first started, the major concern that my clients had revolved around what do we do with staff? Do we keep trying to make payroll even though we've been effectively shut down, even recommended, but effectively shut down by the APA and the state dental societies as well? And the initial advice, which remains the same, is no, because we want to have a viable business to come back to. And so we have to reserve our cash.
Yeah. Of course.
And so the decision to lay off was a very painful one, or furlough for those of our clients that offer health insurance benefits. The decision to lay off was a very painful one, which then I think was alleviated fairly quickly when we saw the provisions that were signed into law last week with the CARES Act, which creates a federal pandemic unemployment, and that's a supplement to the unemployment benefits in each state. So the reason I wanted to address this is because I was sort of laughing to myself this morning when a client of mine texted and said that some of her employees were told by their state unemployment agency, no, the $600 in the CARES Act is not guaranteed. And I said, yes,
They
it
heard
is.
that from the state agency that it's
They heard that from the state.
Wow,
And
great.
so I feel, I'm really sympathetic with the employees as well, because in their corner of this, they're experiencing the same kinds of delays and confusion, misinformation. So that's why I wanted to address that. And I said, there's a thing called the Supremacy Clause in the United States Constitution. And that means that federal law trumps state law when there's a conflict. So regardless of whatever the employee at the state unemployment agency says, just know that as of last Friday, the pandemic unemployment assistance went into effect. I'm sure there will be a delay in when people start to see that additional $600 on top of whatever their state unemployment has calculated.
Would it be retroactive if it's a delay?
It will be retroactive to the day they were laid off. So most employees will initially receive probably a fairly good chunk of money when they start paying out the $600. And I think that has to happen in the next couple of weeks. So for many people, there are some states that are more generous with their base unemployment rates, which would be California, probably Washington State, probably most of the West Coast. But typically it's 40 to 45% of their normal pay. So they would take that base rate calculation and add the $600 to it. So it becomes a fairly substantial amount of unemployment. I mean, it really, for most, if you take the average of all states, you're kind of looking at about a $50,000 a year income is what it's going to equate to.
Wow. Okay.
So the purpose of that, I mean, there's a lot of purposes to it, but it's also going to hopefully help put some money back into the economy. So it's multi-purpose. But I do think for my clients that's been a big source of relief, just to know that employees are taken care of, that the amount of unemployment that they're getting is enough for them to cover their expenses.
Absolutely. It's huge.
It's huge. So anyway, for anybody else who's been told that by their state unemployment agency, just know that it is incorrect.
I hope there aren't many people in that situation.
That's all I'm going to
for
say
clearing
about
it
that.
up.
Those people missed the meeting about the federal law, apparently. The people that answered the other piece of assistance on a personal level that's coming are the stimulus payments. The latest that I've seen on that is that those should be direct deposited if you file your income tax and you have your bank information on file. Those payments should be direct deposited by April 17th is what I read as of this morning.
So there's no action that needs to be taken, you're saying? Or just
no action that needs to be taken.
If you're getting direct deposit.
They don't have your banking information, and the IRS is either has or is creating a portal where you can update the information if your banking information has changed, or if you've done snail mail or for some reason didn't have that information there, you can now go to the IRS portal and put that information, and supposedly there will be no delay. One interesting tidbit, and I only sort of caught this because it applies to me. I have a child who is over the age of 16. Sure. He is still a dependent and will be until he's kicked out of dependency status, because he'll be in school for a very long time. Gotcha. If your child is over the age of 16, they do not get the adult stimulus payment of $1,200. They also do not get the $500 payment for qualifying dependents. So they're stuck.
Oh, I saw some funny videos on the social media about that. I'm frustrated.
So I didn't know this.
I did
not know this until today.
Yeah, that's how I knew about it. It's terrible. Right. I get my news from social media and Google News, right, which is probably not a good source.
Well, I mean, they're like, in the category, I think, of being in one of the most expensive age groups. They drive cars. They eat a lot. They have school tuition.
Yeah.
But they're totally left out of the stimulus. But anyway, those will be coming. They will apply. The $1,200 per adult will apply to anybody who has an adjusted gross income of less than $75,000. Married couples, it'll be a joint income of $150,000. So that'll be on top of their pandemic unemployment assistance. So I think that's a big help to
the vast majority of middle class America is going to get help.
Okay. Exactly. Okay.
You ready? All right.
Okay. So the payment protection loan, that's Section 1102 in this legislation, this has been a topic of a lot of disagreement. And there are experts in the industry that are vehemently disagreeing about the strategy. And so we're going to talk about what that looks like if your office is closed. Think about what the correct strategy might be, and that could be different for individual practices. That's going to depend on, is the practice doing virtual consults? Is the practice still figuring out a way to take care of aligner patients? So do they have some production going on?
Yeah.
Are they keeping a certain number of employees on full-time status? All of those questions would need to be answered. And so I think my advice would be, even though I'm doing one of these webinars right now, is to kind of take what you've learned, because there are lots of great sources in our industry, I have to say. And there are a lot of really smart people that are talking about these things. But at the end of the day, you still have to understand what's best for your individual practice, and not necessarily what the kind of reigning opinion is in the industry itself. And I think that those are conversations, once you have all of the information that you need to make an educated decision, then those are conversations that I would be reviewing with your financial advisor and your CPA, because they're going to have, their finger is more on the pulse of your practice, as opposed to like kind of the overall industry view. So that would be my first piece of advice. We know that the covered period for the loan is until June 30th. That's to apply for the loan. And this is where a big part of the disagreement is coming in, is do you apply tomorrow? Because tomorrow is the first day that you can actually apply through an SBA approved lender.
Okay.
Or do you wait closer to the time that you're going to open? So if you were to take the loan out tomorrow and the funds are dispersed relatively quickly, which is kind of word on the street is what's supposed to happen, it could be within a couple of weeks, you will get your loan disbursement. In order to have the portion of the loan forgiven that's related to your payroll and those other expenses that are outlined in the legislation, which we'll talk about in a little more detail, you would need to spend that money in an 8-week period that would begin to run from the date of disbursement on your loan. So
if your practice is closed, you're not spending the money.
Exactly. So you would spend a portion of it on, some of the expenses that are allowed under the legislation, which would be your interest expense on a mortgage, your rent, your utilities, maybe some payroll for yourself, up to $100,000. It's capped per employee. So the doctor can claim their own salary up to $100,000. And then, if you have kind of a skeleton crew, it would cover those things. Then there would be a remaining part of that loan that will not be forgiven, and that will then have to be paid back. So in the original legislation, and a lot of this, and that's what I mean when we say like we have to wait for regulations, because they purposefully left things kind of open-ended, so that or not really open-ended, but put like wide parameters, I would say, so that then the SBA, the Department of Treasury, can come back and they can tighten those up as needed, as they think is going to work best. So originally in the legislation, it says that the loan term of not more than 10 years for the PPP loan. So we now know that it's not 10 years, but it is 2 years.
It's a huge difference.
It's a huge difference.
On the payment,
To balance that is a big change in the interest percent, though, which was originally defined as something less than 4%, and it's now 0.5%. So that's really cheap money.
Yes, I mean, it's as cheap as it can possibly be.
Right, it's very cheap money, but the term to pay it back is going to be very short. So that would also be, a calculated decision on the practice the doctor's part actually, as to whether they're okay to have a much smaller portion of that loan forgiven and to have to repay a larger portion, if they take out the loan in advance of bringing their staff back to full speed. We'll kind of talk about the calculation of the loan amount versus the ways that you'll use the loan. So I think everybody is probably pretty familiar by now with the calculation is going to be your average monthly payroll times 2.5.
How far back does it have to go? Like
there are
payroll changed in the last 30 days, and you use that number or you use a number farther away?
They're going to go farther back than that. So there are two different periods that they'll look at. One is a little more confusing than the other. The most general and the one that's going to apply to most people is they'll look at the past 12 months, not including the time since you've laid people off.
Okay.
So basically they'll look at 2019 and say, what was your average monthly payroll? And
Sure.
So what does that include? That includes your gross wages, PTO, employer paid portions. So it's important to separate out employer paid portions versus what your employee would pay into, both healthcare premiums and 401k or other retirement plans that are eligible under this legislation, state and local taxes, independent contractor expenses, those will also be covered. And that would mean, so if you're 1099ing a business such as, I don't know, like a marketing firm, you're giving them a 1099, but it's going to, it's actually a business entity and not a single person or an individual. So those would not count. An individual would count. So if you had one person that you 1099 that's essentially a member of your staff but does nothing but marketing for you and maybe works remotely, that would be covered under this.
Okay.
So that's good. And then your doctor's salary up to $100,000 is where that will cap. So in my mind, strategically, you would want to maximize the forgivable amount of this loan, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And they've now split it in such a way that, and again, this is supposedly, and also from what I read on the Department of Treasury's website, which doesn't really seem set in stone. But I think generally the understanding is that 75% of the proceeds from this loan have to be spent on those qualifying payroll expenses. 25% can be spent on those other expenses that fall under the act.
In order for it to be 100% forgivable, is that what you're saying? If you allocate the monies that way?
The money has to be allocated that way. And so another good piece of advice I heard was that when you have, and we'll kind of get to the second loan in a minute, because I know a lot of my clients already applied for the normal SBA disaster loan, the EIDL loan.
Yeah.
It's going to be really, really important to track how you spend this money once it's dispersed. So I've heard CPA advice, and I think it's very sound, which is to have two separate checking accounts for the business where the proceeds from each of these loans, the EIDL loan and then the PPP loan, would separately go into those accounts, and you would pay those qualifying expenses out of that account so that you have a tracking system. Because what happens when you get to the end of the 8-week period, you're going to have to give the bank a paper trail, and the bank will actually decide the forgiveness. They have 60 days to decide what part of the expenses that you paid out of those proceeds will be forgiven.
The bank is making that decision?
The bank will make that decision.
Okay, that's interesting.
And that's for the PPP loan, which I think most people are aware now. The initial SBA loan, and this is still the case with the EIDL loan, is through the SBA website itself. Yeah. This loan, the PPP loan, is being administered by SBA banks. So banks that have always been able to, and I think new banks will come on board. They'll have to for the sheer number of loan applications they're going to get, but it's an SBA approved lender. Another good piece of advice was to go to, if your bank, which they probably are an SBA approved lender, to go to your own bank that already handles your business accounts, because those banks, it's in their best interest for their small business clients to survive this.
Of course,
So
right.
they're probably going to take better care of you than just, going to any other bank. And I think, having a personal relationship with a banker is going to be important too. They can help you set up these other accounts to funnel these loan proceeds into. And then that's going to make everything so much easier when you get to the end of your 8 weeks and they take their 60 days to start reviewing and making sure that you spent the funds accordingly.
Yes. Okay.
Utilities, and I don't know why they're defined this way, but the way they're defined right now is gas, water, phone, and internet for any of those that were existing before February 15th of this year. I'm not sure why I haven't seen, it seems like electric would be considered a utility.
I totally missed that you didn't say that. Electric isn't in there?
I haven't seen it, and I don't know why. So
great. Okay.
I feel like if you paid that utility with these loan proceeds, it might be considered part of the forgivable amount of the loan. Another piece of confusion for me, and this is why I said I feel like we will have to keep doing this throughout the course of the pandemic, to continue updating as regulations become available and more clarification is brought to all of these different pieces and how we utilize them. As of yesterday, I was seeing in all of the kind of professional organizations, whether it's CPAs or HR groups in this industry, no one had seen the actual application so far. So I got an application from an SBA lender, and this is what I'm going to show you. It's Sba Form 2483. I was shocked to see that it is 2 pages.
That's amazing. That's
your PPP application.
Yeah.
There are a couple additional pages that are just canned language that would be in any SBA loan. And in this loan, for instance, in this loan application, under the certifications, it actually says that the funds will be used to retain workers and maintain payroll or make mortgage payments, lease payments, and utility payments. So every other interpretation I've seen of this says interest on mortgage payments, not actual mortgage.
Yeah.
But in the loan
actual application, it says mortgage.
Yeah. And it also says or. So it says the funds will be used to retain workers and maintain payroll or make mortgage payments, lease payments, and utility payments. Wow. So that begs the question that I don't think anyone has answered yet. Does that mean if you were to take this loan, if you applied tomorrow and it was dispersed within the next 2 weeks, that you would be able to use all of the loan proceeds in those 8 weeks, if you could use them all up in 8 weeks on mortgage, lease, and utilities, and then whatever was remaining, you could either keep it and let it, you could let it mature over the 2 years at the 0.5% interest, or you could prepay it back to the bank, because on either of these loans, there is no prepayment penalty. So that I
was going to ask you that. So you could just pay it back.
That would be an
knowing
option.
It's not going to be forgivable.
Right.
But it's also super cheap money. So if you want some sort of loan,
it is super cheap money. One of the other things that is, it's actually in the loan application, and I've seen, I think on the Department of Treasury's website, which is stating that once you apply for the PPP loan, you will not be eligible for any other SBA assistance loan for the remainder of this year.
I mean, that's reasonable. Okay.
It's reasonable, but for practices that are closed, it's a little bit concerning because
I see.
Right. If you can't, my recommendation would be to wait for several weeks before applying for this. That would be my recommendation. Because I think while some people are worried that they're going to run out of funds, which could happen, I think if they run out of funds, I mean, we already know there's a 4th wave of stimulus in the works. Yeah. So there are a lot of businesses right now. I mean, if you're a restaurant and you only have a skeleton crew, right, to do carryout orders.
I just went to a Mexican restaurant last night to pick something up, and it was all dark, one person.
Right.
The pickup. It was so strange. It was eerie.
Yeah, it is. And, so it's the same for an orthodontic practice. If you were to take this loan, you would essentially to spend the 75% on your payroll expenses so that it would be forgiven, you would essentially be burning through that money to bring staff back on to full-time status with no job to do.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, yes, we can create, there are a lot of things that we can do to create value in different, work from home programs for every practice. And my initial thought before we knew the details of this loan and when the 8 weeks would start to tick down, now we know it's when you get the loan. Originally, I was thinking, and I think some other people were thinking, that you had until June 30th to start spending the money, which would have been more beneficial, but that's not the case now. So then I would question bringing people back off of unemployment. We don't know how long this is going to last. Looking at, there are already some other states that have pushed out to the end of May. There are states like Oregon that are saying September. So without knowing when you can bring staff back, to me, I would be making a calculated risk and guess based on, number one, which we should have information in the next probably week and a half. How quickly are they dispersing funds from these loans?
Yeah.
Since people can't apply until tomorrow, we don't know the answer to that question.
Of course.
But
you have to use the money up by June 30th?
You have to use the money within 8 weeks from the date the loan originates.
Okay.
So if, for instance, we're learning from the media or from friends of ours who have taken out the PPP loans that it seems to be an average of 3 weeks before the loan is paid out.
Yeah.
Well, that would be something different then, because you could make kind of an educated guess that, okay, if I wait for 1 month, putting me now into May, and I take this loan, it's going to be paid back at, it's going to be paid out somewhere around the last 2 weeks of May, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that would put you in a much more advantageous position because you would start ramping back up for seeing patients again. So I would want to bring back at least 1 full week before I knew we were going to start seeing patients, because every practice is going to have a lot that they can do to get ready for that and make sure that their reopening is very strong.
Yeah, of course.
So that's what I would want to do. I also think for, there's a certain element that's like panicking people, like you have to apply tomorrow. If you don't apply tomorrow, the money's going to be gone. My feeling is if the money is gone, there's going to be a fourth wave of this stimulus that's going to extend the same kind of PPP loan to small business owners that didn't already take it out.
Yes.
I think if that wasn't a plan, this wouldn't be in here about, from February 15th to the period ending December 31st of 2020, that you cannot and will not receive another loan under this program. So I think that's kind of a little predictive of what they think is going to happen in the next few months. And just also, so there's no confusion, the PPP loan does not bar you from applying for the EIDL loan and vice versa.
Do you recommend to apply for both regardless, or what would be the information you need to know whether you need to apply for both, one or the other?
So the EIDL loan, I think it depends on how solid your cash reserves are. If you're financially in a good position and you're not concerned about what this is going to look like for your practice 4 months from now, 6 months from now, I probably wouldn't apply for the EIDL loan. A lot of people rush to apply for it because the first $10,000 of that loan is essentially a grant.
Yeah.
So even if you're denied ultimately, like if you don't receive that loan, you still are eligible for the $10,000 grant on the front end of it. However, it actually does decrease the amount of the loan that you'll receive under PPP.
Yeah.
So
okay.
in that sense, they're related. In every other sense, they're not related. If that makes sense. But they would take the 10,000. So if they calculated,
they just reduce it by 10,000. you're saying?
They would reduce it by 10,000 because you already have an amount of $10,000 that is.
Yeah, which is essentially a grant. Okay, then
right.
That makes
So
sense.
it's a wash in that sense. If you apply for EIDL and you get the $10,000 grant, it's not going to hurt you. It's not going to hurt you on the PPP front. You know, again, the loan terms I think are favorable. It's the 3.75% over 30 years. So it's a really long loan term.
Yeah.
So if you're at all nervous, and also no prepayment penalty on that loan as well. So if you are,
also, if you end up not needing it, you can just pay it back, and
you can pay it back.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that there's not a risk in taking it. I believe that the amount of time it'll take to get approved for EIDL will be much longer. In general, SBA loans could be 2 to 3 months in the past, and now there's this huge influx. Even though they're trying to expedite the process, I question if that's really possible.
Well, yeah, I mean, they have to hire and train people. People have to sleep, right? I mean, even they're working nonstop.
Right. Which is why, I mean, I think the PPP loan is going out to the SBA banks and they'll be handling it. But again, the banks are having to learn right alongside with everyone else exactly what the criteria are.
Yes.
So that they can, so that they can do the loan process. Let me see if there's anything else that's super pertinent. Did anyone have any questions yet?
Rick was asking, do you recommend deferring applying for the loan, fearing the fees might dry up? But I think you addressed that earlier.
Yeah, so I think, we're all dealing with the same unknowns, which is we don't know when we're going to reopen. We don't know how soon after you apply for this loan that the loan will be dispersed, and then your 8 weeks will begin, will begin to run. What I would say in terms of preparation is to have all of your documents ready. I would be prepared to apply. And then I would have that conversation with your financial advisor and your CPA about what they think strategically the best time is. If I can only say, if it were me, I would be waiting to see evidence of how long these loans are taking to disperse.
That makes sense.
And then once I think it's another 2 weeks. There are certain groups that can apply also for PPP and on certain dates. The first round are these small businesses with under 500 employees. So in other words, all of our clients.
Yeah.
2 weeks from now, I believe the date opens for independent contractors and other types of small businesses that aren't defined under this normal sort of definition of small business. So that will create another sort of rush and demand on the system. So, I think I would probably give it the next couple of weeks to see what we can find out about when these loans are being dispersed. It could be that there's a very quick turnaround time. And then if that's the case, and you're still concerned that there may not be additional stimulus, and maybe you say, even if I only get the 25% of this loan forgiven that I can use on my rent, maybe mortgage, maybe interest on mortgage.
Yeah, right? I can't believe it's so clear. Okay.
I'm sure they'll have that clarified at the end of the 8 weeks.
I'm sure, of course. We do have another question, a couple questions. So, any loans in the CARES Act where the dentist owner can have money for their personal survival income?
Well, so that would be, and that could also be a reason that maybe you would decide you want to go ahead and apply for PPE or PPP tomorrow.
Yes.
So because your average monthly payroll includes your own payroll, what you pay yourself, that is capped at $100,000, but that would still give you the ability to pay yourself over the next 8 weeks, and that would be forgiven. And it would be more than you would qualify for on unemployment, because a lot of doctors have also applied for unemployment if they pay themselves
that makes sense.
part of their payroll.
So if you're hiring someone new, like a person to help with marketing during a crisis, would the money cover their pay, or does it only cover currently employed contracted people?
So it's within that covered period. So I think if you hire someone, actually, it should, I believe, if the way that I understand it is correctly, that person should be covered, because what the purpose is, I mean, if you look at like really what they're trying to accomplish with this loan,
Yeah.
is you have to bring back the same number of employees, according to that average calculation that they're doing from your numbers last year. So if your average number of employees last year was 8 in a month, and then you would also look at the average dollar amount on your payroll. They want those things not to go below, on the payroll amount, not to go below 75% of your average monthly last year. And they want your numbers to stay the same. You're not going to be penalized if the number goes up.
Oh.
Only penalized if the number goes down. So if you had 8 qualified employees on average last year, full-time equivalents is what they're calling them, and this year when you take the loan, let's say you bring back only 4, then you would only have 50% of the loan proceeds that are dedicated towards your payroll expenses forgiven. So you would have the remaining 50% that you would either prepay back, or you would agree to let it mature on that 0.5% 2 years.
Gotcha. All right, so follow-up question to the personal, using it for personal income. What if you're not taking salary being an LLC and you're just using the profit? So can you still use it for that?
So I think that first of all, I would advise to take that question to your CPA to double check, because they're going to have the most expertise in terms of your payroll expenses. If you're not paying yourself on payroll, I sort of question whether or not you could take out the PPE or the PPP loan individually as well as with the practice. And I think that would be a question both for your CPA and your banker.
Mm-hmm.
If you're paying yourself out of the profits, like that is covered under the new unemployment and the pandemic unemployment, actually, which again, I know that a lot of the state unemployment agencies are not up to speed with that, according to firsthand accounts that I received, it would be funny if it actually didn't have to do with people putting food on the table right now. But the level of confusion there is extensive, apparently. So yes, those would be things that I would probably take to my CPA and find out if you can do that, because I do know, independent contractors, people with LLCs, there are ways to apply for these loans, and I feel like there has to be a way to cover what you would normally pay yourself.
Gotcha. This might be, let me know if this is the same question. What if I'm a sole proprietor? Can I include my typical monthly draw as a doctor's salary? I'm taking a draw and not a salary. I think it's very similar to the other question, but
it's very similar to the other question. And I think that that's probably, again, like a gray area. I know that in that scenario, you do qualify for unemployment based on, what you have taken out of the business and quote paid yourself. You would qualify for unemployment. How that will be determined in terms of the payroll costs, I am not sure.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I have to say I'm just not sure.
We'll look that up. I can ask my accountant as well. All right, can an employee continue to work part-time and still get unemployment?
They can, as long as you have to be careful about this in terms of seeing what your state unemployment rules are. So in some states, it's a percentage. They can only work a certain percentage of the hours or get paid a certain percentage of the pay that they received previously. What I would say is, with having clients in multiple states, the kind of sweet spot seems to be somewhere around 4 to 5 hours a week. As long as they don't exceed that, it may or may not, and this again depends on the state, it may or may not take out of their base calculation. In some states, it doesn't. They can work up to 4 or 5 hours, and it doesn't impact the smaller amount that they normally would get from state unemployment. It will not impact the $600 as long as you're staying within those state guidelines. And every practice, honestly, I was having a conversation with a client yesterday about, whether or not strategically it was a good idea to have, phone coverage 8 hours a day. And of course, it is a good idea because you could be getting calls from new patients, people that want to schedule consults. I would guess that a lot of people that are outside of our industry don't even realize that like dental offices and ortho offices are closed. Unless they're in active treatment or have a child in active treatment. I'm going to assume that a lot of people are going to think it's the same as like your primary care doctor, right?
Oh,
Like
absolutely.
healthcare is still working.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking that, I would assume that you could actually get a decent number of calls from people looking to schedule initial consults. Then that becomes an issue of how do you achieve 8 hour a day phone coverage when, you're essentially going to have to try to piecemeal together.
I'll have like really weird shifts or something.
And from
Yeah.
home.
Okay.
And so that was something we talked about and also sort of brainstormed the idea, well, what about if we change our outgoing message to something like, if you're an existing patient, press 1. If you're a new patient, press 2. And then under the press 2 button, it would give them options for virtual consults. Maybe we would have it like priority ring through and someone would take those calls.
Yeah.
I think there's a number of ways that you could handle that so that we're not missing those calls.
Absolutely. And that is critical not to miss them, because
It is critical.
there's any chance to get new business during this time, you want to take advantage of it.
Exactly.
Okay, so if you've already applied for the SBA, can you roll it over to the PPP, and how?
So to my knowledge, the only part that rolls over is the initial $10,000 grant on the front end of the EIDL loan. And again, that's just going to reduce the total amount. So if they did your calculation of 2.5 times your average monthly salary, maybe that came out to, $250,000. Now, out of the forgivable amount, they're just going to take $10,000 off the top of that.
Gotcha. So if you're a solo owner, should you apply for unemployment or should you wait for the PPP?
I would apply for unemployment.
Yeah.
I would apply for unemployment because depending on how you decide to strategize this and when you decide to take out that loan, as soon as you would get your loan proceeds, you would begin paying yourself again. But even if there is a 3-week or a 4-week period, why not take your unemployment? It could take 2 weeks, from what I'm hearing at least, to get your first unemployment check, but it would be retroactive. So
yeah, so as long as you can hold on, you'll get it back anyway.
Exactly.
All right.
I think the same thing that we covered kind of at the beginning the last time, and I want to say that I think that everybody is trying to stay in close contact with their staff and to really keep whatever their office culture is, to keep that alive and to keep their employees connected to them during this time. And I would say in particular, I think that the strengths-based teams that we work with, they are just naturally inclined to this. I have been just so impressed. One of our clients, their entire staff is like working out together with apps like Peloton. Like they'll say, hey.
Yeah, so they really are just staying connected virtually.
Yeah, they'll say, hey, do you want to do such and such run at this time tomorrow? And, they'll all chime in like, yeah, I'm going to do this or I'll do this. And so aside from just being connected, like with the office, these are just really strong teams that are so connected to each other as it is, that this time out of work doesn't interrupt that. And I think it's been so neat to see, because I know that those teams, they're going to come back and they're not going to skip a beat. They're already thinking about how they're coming back. They're thinking about what they can be doing to make that more successful. And I don't know many people that get laid off and are still thinking about how they contribute to their place of business. So I think it speaks volumes to kind of the power of integrating strengths work with your team. Right now, I think you would see that more than ever. And I think it also speaks to the kind of clients that we work with who are just really concerned about their teams, and they're more like a family.
So when you're doing this with a client, can you kind of walk us through what that looks like for a
through the
practice?
strengths work.
Yeah. What does that really mean to someone? What are you doing?
Sure. So Gallup, has researched for many, many years and done meta-analysis. It's been global research all over the world about sort of the state of the workforce.
Yeah.
And they identified 32 strengths. And when people take this assessment, it's not a test. We always have to tell everyone that this isn't a test, it's an assessment. You'll rate from 1 to 32 in your strengths from top to bottom, but the top 5 are generally the ones that are kind of the most prevalent. And so when people will take this assessment, they'll read their top 5 strengths, and vast majority of people will say, oh my gosh, that's me. So like, for instance, my number 1 strength is analytical. That's very me. There are other people that would be woo, which are very like, positive relationship building types of people. So even though we all have these strengths, we really exhibit those top 5. Those are the ones that, are at play during most of our day. And so when we work with an office, the first step is just having everyone do those strengths assessments. Many times, you can sort of categorize like the types of strengths that are very good at being a treatment coordinator, for instance.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like someone with my top 5 strengths would probably be a better financial coordinator than a treatment coordinator, because I enjoy doing analytical types of pursuits like numbers and research. And other people, really shine when they get to spend their day working with people and building relationships. So when we start to look at the team overall, how the strengths come together, whether people are kind of in the position that plays to their strengths the most, and also just making people aware of their strengths. So we can kind of all utilize them in positive or negative ways. We call it like balcony or basement.
Okay.
And when people are operating like in the balcony of their strengths, they're using them in the most positive ways that benefit themselves and others most.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So what you see over time as employees start to really understand the strengths work, they understand more about themselves. They can operate in the balcony more often. They can apply themselves to the types of jobs and tasks in the office that play most to their strengths. And then they can kind of strengths pair and cooperate with other people on the team in ways that maximize both of their strengths profiles. Yeah, I think it just creates a very strong team because people start to develop a very deep understanding of who it is that they're working with and how they work best with those people. And when, there's a big difference when I would say like when we start working with a client, and they may be a very good team, very talented team, but I'll tell you that no matter how talented they are, you will see a huge difference when you walk in that same practice a year down the road or 2 years down the road. The way that the strengths-based teams work together is truly amazing. I mean, it's just a really cool process to watch happen.
So you're helping identify everyone's strengths, and you're working with the practice to implement changes based off the data.
Right, based off of the data. Yeah, that's part of what we do. And, we do coaching with all of the staff members to help them understand how to best utilize their strengths, how to work best with other people on the team. So yeah, I would say it's part of what we do. When we do recruiting and hiring for clients, we do that with strengths in mind.
So you'll help people with recruiting and hiring as well?
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So, and I would say like a lot of the clients that we've worked with long-term, we've helped really build those teams from the ground up.
So this might be a good time to even go through that exercise. They're all at home. You could kind of bring the office back based off and
that's true.
Kind of arrange the teams in that way.
Yes, that's true.
Kind of starts off from scratch. Let's just answer. We have another question. Do you recommend still paying the dentist owner a minimum salary so you can still max out your 401k while on unemployment? Interesting.
So there are some rules about the 401k in this loan. And I think everybody is kind of aware there are also there's been a huge kind of relaxation on the 401k rules in terms of
Oh,
people
if you need to take money out of it.
taking money out of it, and the tax implications of that, penalties. So if you can afford to keep paying yourself to contribute to your 401k, and you can do that even without taking the loan, then I would say absolutely keep doing it. It's just setting you up, in a very strong financial position. You will also be able to use those PPE proceeds for that, to that end as well, up to that capped $100,000 anyway.
Gotcha.
So
It's included in your. That makes sense.
Your contribution, yeah.
All right, so we have another question back to the strengths. So how do you identify strengths? Do you give them a personality test? So
it's not a personality test, but a lot of people think of it that way. It is a strengths assessment through Gallup. It's a very researched tool. It's been used for a very long time. It asks a series of questions, and then you will get their personal assessment that will show you the top 5 strengths. You can also unlock the entire spectrum of strengths from 1 through 32, you would start off with doing the assessment, and we generally do just sort of a big overview with new clients about what it means. Everybody has a lot of questions about what it means, and so we typically do individual sessions with every member on a staff, like coaching sessions, to help them understand what does their assessment mean.
You'll do an individual session with every member?
Yeah, we do an individual session with every member, similar when we would be in the hiring process. If we're down to a couple of candidates, we would administer the assessment and look at the strengths profile and how it fits into the job description that we're hiring for.
Oh, so you can do that? I didn't know you could do that. You could do this assessment before you hire?
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, we rely heavily on it because we see the consistency across time and across, vastly different teams.
Yeah. I mean, I've managed teams as big as 30 and as small as 3. So it really makes a huge difference that everyone kind of is doing their geniuses, what they're really best at, because to function as a team, everyone keeps
right. And it's sort of, kind of goes back to, I don't know how familiar people are with Good to Great, the book, but I think that's really like an amazing book about successful businesses and how you take any business really from being a good business to a great business. And a lot of it is about, seats on the bus. So you might have the right team, but they're not in the right seat on the bus.
Yeah.
That to me is very rewarding as well. When you go into a practice and you see someone who is very talented and is a really, benefit to the team, but they might be in the absolute wrong position for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then through working with them, getting to know them personally, understanding their strengths, and you can transition them into a role that they're better suited for, and then kind of watch them blossom into it. It's a very rewarding part of this work that we do.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Because you might figure it out months later, but it'd be great to just know it off the get-go. And
exactly.
That makes sense. Someone was saying, it's asking, are there any thoughts regarding the changes in delivery of care in the ortho office? Like, for example, social distancing, PPE.
So I think that's a question on everyone's mind. I think that's going to impact how soon we can open, to be honest. As long as PPE, like personal protective equipment, we're talking about PPE and PPP.
Yes, right. The acronyms.
We started creating protocols with our clients as soon as before they were technically closed, but still seeing patients those last couple of weeks when nobody quite knew if we were closing or not.
Yeah.
And we developed some really stringent protocols for that. But I do think in light of this, knowing that ultimately we need a couple of things to happen for this coronavirus to not be front and center in all of our lives. And that is either, a vaccine is going to be developed or some kind of effective treatment such that regardless of the number of people that get infected, when they go to the hospital, they're not requiring ICU beds and ventilators.
Yeah, it doesn't overwhelm our healthcare.
Right. So the hopeful part of me thinks yes, that could happen any day because there are really smart people all over the world that are researching this and trying to figure things out.
Absolutely.
But I also know the realist in me a vaccine, to even think 12 months that would be realistic, I think is crazy. So the reality is that I think we're going to be working in I still think it's going to be a roller coaster. I think we may go back and see patients. Then I think the fall could come and we could see another wave of this and another, peak, and we could close again. I think as long as we're seeing patients, and unless we see something crazy where the summer months come and, the cases just absolutely go through the floor, which I hope. But from all of the information I've seen, I don't think that that's going to be the case. So then, if you're creating aerosols of any kind in the office, which of course, if you're doing D-bands, bondings, probably you're using a handpiece. And so I don't think there is a safe way to use a handpiece without being able to isolate the patient in a separate treatment room, not in an open bay clinic, which is how most
offices are set up. Yeah.
I don't think there's a safe way to do it without an N95 mask, which we know nobody knows where to get them, right? And they're going to obviously go to hospitals first and people kind of on the front lines. So,
I kind of feel, having been in supply chain, things like that, I think.
You think it'll be solved?
Shortages of stuff, it'll get really bad, and then all of a sudden there's just going to be a wave of them, and we'll have more than we need.
I hope so, because
I think a pretty agile supply chain in America.
I think dental offices and orthodontic offices, I think the N95 mask is going to become like a reality.
Yeah.
I think moving forward, that's going to be just a part of the way that we practice, along with face shields. I think that there may be more need in practices to have isolated patient areas for those procedures that are considered most high risk. So like anything that would create an aerosol, that's what I definitely think. I think when we come back, we're probably still going to be in the same kind of protocol that we were having our clients do before this, which was only the patients come in the office. So parents and siblings would wait in the parking lot in their car. I think just minimizing exposure overall. Again, unless we see a huge drop in the summer months with this.
Yeah. It'd be nice if you could just test at home, you got a positive or negative, and then come in.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking technology that can do that, diagnose disease at home, is going to be coming.
I think so too. And I think the other thing that is going to be kind of a game changer too is when we get an antigen test that's going to be able to tell us who's actually had this.
If they've had it in the past, even if they showed no symptoms.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, when we can determine how much immunity people have that have had it. If people test positive for the antigen, and that means, they can kind of go back to work as usual. So I think all of that I think everything is
that's interesting. I see
it's going to change, but I do think that this will change the way that dentistry is practiced forever. I really do believe that. Because this isn't the first pandemic, and it won't be the last. And at least for the next probably 18 months, we'll be directly dealing with this one. So I think that the precautions in the practice are just necessarily going to increase. I think it might change even the design of the way that our clinics are laid out.
Yeah, the whole industry is going through just huge changes right now. It's probably going to be for the better at the end, I'd say.
I think so.
Safer and be able to do more business, etc.
Yeah.
All right. So if anyone wants to take this Clifton's test with you guys and wants you guys to help them, what should they do? How do they get in contact with you to get started?
So they can always reach me through email, which is on our website, our Facebook site, which is Engaged Ortho. What is it, Richie?
Just look up Engaged Practice Growth Specialist. You'll find
Engaged Practice Growth Specialist.
But I would just go to the website, engagedortho.com. Everything you need.
Yeah, everything that you need is there. Yes. You're the marketing expert.
But so I'm sure that you'd be happy to help anyone with that.
Yeah, I would be happy to help anyone answer questions. And of course, one of the silver linings of this that I think is, as we can all kind of settle into this extra time that we've been given, because I think one thing just in closing that kind of gets lost in all of this is, of course, we all have to worry about our businesses. We have people that depend on us, and we all want to survive this and be here when it's over. at the same time, I always kind of want to remember what's actually going on out there, because there are a lot of people really suffering, you know, that are losing people that they love, and there are doctors on the front lines, and you know, just people that are really kind of like knee deep in all of this. And I think we all have to kind of remember that. It's sobering. And then to also just appreciate this little bit of a slowdown, because it's not going to last forever. And I think all of us are kind of, you know, like, oh my gosh, we're like locked in with our kids, and this is crazy.
Oh yeah. As an introvert, I'm going into kind of retrospective mode for my personal growth stuff, but
Yeah.
we're also looking at our business in general. How can we better serve everyone? What are things we wanted to do for a long time that we didn't act on? People are calling me, a lot of doctors, that they know they needed a marketing firm. They just never had time to talk to people and make the decision. So we're helping guide them through that. So a lot of that long-term strategy stuff it's a good time to
Right. There's a lot of opportunity like in this time. If everyone can kind of calm down a little bit, you know, take it a day at a time.
Yeah.
Whether it's enjoying the extra time with your kids that you're always so busy and stressed out, maybe you feel like you don't get quality time with them, thinking about personal goals and business goals, and you know, and then at the end of the day, there's always Netflix. So
Oh yeah. I know, what would we have done 20 years ago in this situation? Whew. All right. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. If anything changes, and I think I'll ask you on again.
okay.
And thank you so much. It was
Yeah,
great
thanks for
talking to you.
having me. Have a great day.
All right, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow, and take it easy. Stay safe out there.